Acheron in Tensura by Apandora 15. Good morning. The daily duels between Luminous and Acheron had become a ritual. Each morning, they met in the training grounds, exchanging blows and techniques. With every passing day, Acheron absorbed invaluable tips on magic from Luminous, while Luminous honed her sword skills under Acheron's meticulous guidance. These intense yet enlightening training sessions deepened their bond, blending mutual respect. One morning, as always, Luminous lounged on her sofa, savoring the tranquility before the day's activities. She twirled a lock of her silver hair absently, her mind drifting back to the previous night's thoughts. A knock on her door disrupted her reverie, irritating her. "Come in," she allowed. Acheron burst through the doors, her presence commanding and yet somehow out of place in the cozy room. Luminous perked up at the sight of her. "So, how did you even get here?" she asked, half amused. Acheron glanced behind her, and Luminous followed her gaze to see Gunther standing there, ever the diligent butler. He bowed politely before walking away, leaving Acheron alone in the room with Luminous. Acheron took a seat on the chair opposite Luminous, who suddenly had an idea. "Acheron, sit next to me," Luminous ordered, patting the spot beside her. Acheron looked confused but complied, moving to sit next to Luminous on the sofa. To her surprise, she soon felt something on her thighs. She looked down to find Luminous resting her head on her lap, which shocked her. "You are not allowed to leave. We will do this every morning," Luminous said, her tone more commanding than affectionate, though the firmness of her hand on Acheron's waist was gentle. Acheron stopped resisting and stayed still, uncertain of how to react. Then, Luminous spoke again, this time with a genuine request. "Can you caress my hair a little? They're a bit messy from sleeping." Acheron hesitated but then began to gently run her fingers through Luminous's hair, feeling the silken strands slip through her fingers. The act felt intimate, a quiet moment shared between the two. As the silence settled over them, Luminous asked, "Do you have feelings, Acheron?" Acheron paused, her fingers stilling in Luminous's hair. "Yes, I have feelings, but they are constantly suppressed by my ultimate skill." Luminous shifted slightly, looking up at Acheron. "So, you feel, but you can't express them?" Acheron nodded. "It's difficult. The skill keeps me focused, but it also makes it hard to connect with those feelings." Luminous sighed softly. "We'll work on that, together." Acheron continued to caress Luminous's hair, a tentative step towards expressing the feelings she had long kept buried. For the first time, she felt a flicker of something warm and unguarded. The following days saw a subtle change in their interactions. Their training sessions were still intense, but there were more moments of quiet conversation. Luminous took every opportunity to initiate physical contact, whether it was a reassuring hand on Acheron's shoulder or a brief touch as she corrected her stance. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling duel, they sat side by side on the training ground, catching their breath. Luminous glanced at Acheron, noting the way the sunlight caught the edges of her hair, turning it into a halo of gold. "Acheron," Luminous began, "do you ever think about the future?" Acheron looked at her, a slight frown creasing her brow. "The future?" "Yes," Luminous said softly. "What you want out of life, beyond duty and combat." Acheron was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. "I haven't given it much thought," she admitted. "My life has always been about duty, about survival and recently protection of Milam." Luminous reached out, her hand covering Acheron's. "And what about what you want?" Acheron looked down at their joined hands, her expression softening. "I'm not sure, but lately, I've been thinking about it more." Luminous smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. "That's a start." In the mornings, their routine of Luminous lying on Acheron's lap continued. It became a cherished ritual for both of them, a time of quiet intimacy that contrasted with the intensity of their training sessions. One morning, as Acheron ran her fingers through Luminous's hair, Luminous looked up at her. "Do you remember what Milam said about marriage?" Acheron's fingers paused for a moment before resuming their gentle caress. "Yes, it was unexpected." Luminous laughed softly. "It was, but it got me thinking." "About marriage?" Acheron asked, her voice careful. "Yes," Luminous admitted. "About us. I truly like you, Acheron, more than I ever thought possible, but I need to know if you feel the same way." Acheron looked puzzled, her brow furrowing. "What is marriage?" Luminous blinked, momentarily taken aback. "You don't know what marriage is?" Acheron shook her head. No, I've heard the term, but I don't understand it fully. Luminous sighed softly, shifting to sit up and face Acheron directly. Marriage is a bond between two people who love each other. It's a commitment to share your lives, to support and care for each other. Acheron considered this, her expression thoughtful. So it's a partnership based on affection and support? Yes, Luminous replied, her heart beating faster. It's more than just a partnership. It's about being with someone who makes you happy, who you want to spend your life with. Acheron's eyes softened as she looked at Luminous. I see, and you're asking if I want that with you? Luminous nodded, feeling a mixture of hope and anxiety. Yes. I care about you deeply, Acheron. I want to know if you could see us together like that. Acheron was silent for a long moment, her gaze steady and unwavering. I care about you too, Luminous. More than anyone else. But expressing those feelings, it's difficult for me. Luminous reached out, cupping Acheron's cheek. We'll figure it out together, she said softly. One step at a time. Acheron leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly. Yes. Their sparring sessions continued, each one a blend of physical exertion and emotional connection. Luminous found herself looking forward to these moments, not just for the training but for the chance to be close to Acheron. One evening, as they walked back to the palace after a particularly exhausting duel, Luminous took Acheron's hand in hers. Acheron looked at her, surprise flickering in her eyes. Just this once, Luminous said with a smile. Acheron squeezed her hand gently, a rare smile appearing on her lips. All right, just this once. They walked in comfortable silence, the warmth of their joined hands a silent promise of more to come. Back in her chambers, Luminous sat pondering. It is working, it is slow but it is. With a determined smile, she began planning her next move, hopeful for the future they could build together. 16. Rampage. Luminous lay on Acheron's lap, enjoying the moment of leisure. Acheron's fingers moved gently through her hair, providing a soothing comfort that had become a cherished part of their morning routine. However, their peaceful respite was abruptly interrupted by a resonant voice that echoed through the room. Notice. Individual Milam Nava is evolving into a true demon lord. After evolution is completed, those close to her will obtain gifts. Both Luminous and Acheron shot to their feet, their expressions shifting from serene to alarmed. We need to move, now, Luminous said urgently. Acheron nodded, her usual stoicism giving way to swift action. Luminous conjured a gate, its edges glowing with holy energy. Together, they stepped through, emerging into a scene of chaos. On the other side, Guy Crimson was locked in a struggle against Milam, who had lost all semblance of reason. Her attacks were fierce and unrelenting, and Guy was clearly reaching his limit trying to contain her without causing harm. Acheron wasted no time, rushing forward and delivering a powerful punch that sent Milam reeling. Guy looked over, a mix of relief and irritation on his face. Finally. What took you so long? Acheron's eyes were cold. What did you do to her? Guy raised his hands in mock surrender. I did nothing. I was trying to prevent her from causing more damage. Luminous stepped forward, her presence regal and commanding. Watch your tongue, demon. Guy smirked. Ah, you must be the daughter of the ancestor. Luminous's eyes flashed with anger, but Acheron placed a calming hand on her shoulder. We need to focus on Milam. Luminous huffed but nodded. This isn't over, demon. I'll deal with you later. Guy's smirk widened. I'll be waiting. Milam, having recovered, charged back into the fray, her attacks wild and destructive. Acheron met her head-on, using her sword in its scabbard to deflect blows and keep her at bay. Despite Milam's increased power, Acheron's speed kept her in the fight. However, Milam's sheer strength was overwhelming, and Acheron struggled to keep up. The pressure mounted, forcing Acheron to consider going all out. As Milam began to overpower her, Acheron made a decisive move. She took a step back, and suddenly, the battlefield transformed. The ground beneath them turned into a vast ocean, and the sky darkened, painted in shades of black, white, and red. A distant black hole loomed on the horizon, sucking in the surrounding light. Acheron unsheathed her katana, and red sparks rippled out from the blade. Her eyes turned red with white irises, and blood began to leak from them as if she were crying. Her hair turned white, and her left forearm turned red, adorned with blooming red flowers. It's time to go to sleep, Acheron intoned, her voice cold and final. Luminous and Guy watched in awe as Acheron and Milam were engulfed in a different dimension. In this alternate space, Acheron fought with an intensity that bordered on desperation. Milam, covered in wounds that refused to heal, continued her relentless assault. Acheron bit her lip, knowing she was running out of options. She was faced with a choice: kill or be killed. The weight of the decision bore down on her, and for the first time, she felt the true gravity of her power. Just as she was about to make her final move, a new presence appeared. A woman with wings materialized, radiating an otherworldly aura. Acheron immediately got her guard up, but the woman raised a hand in peace. "I'm a friend of Milam," the winged woman said, her voice calm and soothing. "My name is Ramirez, the Spirit Queen." Acheron hesitated, still wary. "How did you get here? This dimension is my creation." Ramirez smiled. "I used the spirits of nihility to enter. It's a tricky process, but necessary to help Milam." Luminous, having followed closely behind, spoke up. "I just followed right behind her." Ramirez turned to Luminous, surprised. "You followed me? Do you realize we're now trapped in this dimension? Only the one who cast it can take us back." Luminous looked at Acheron in her emanator form, mesmerized by her appearance. The transformation had an ethereal beauty, and for a moment, Luminous was lost in admiration before snapping back to reality. As Ramirez approached Milam, Luminous followed. "Do you know how to stop this rampage?" Luminous asked. Ramirez looked at Milam, sadness in her eyes. Her core has been overtaken by her skill. She's now just a rampaging beast. Luminous's heart sank. "Is there a way to cure her?" Ramirez nodded. "There's a way." Before anyone could react, a light enveloped Ramirez and Milam, who was still in her coffin. When the light faded, Milam had transformed back into a small fairy form, similar to Ramirez. "She will be fine now," Ramirez assured them. Acheron sheathed her katana, her form returning to normal. Ramirez looked at her with a frown. "Ah, because of you, there's a new element now. Do you know how much work it will take to get the new spirits in their place?" Luminous looked at Acheron, who seemed exhausted but relieved. "We should get back." Acheron nodded, and with a wave of her hand, the dimension dissolved, returning them to the battlefield where Guy Crimson stood waiting. "All done?" Guy asked casually. "Yes," Luminous replied curtly, "for now." As they prepared to return, the voice of the world spoke again. "Notice, bestowing gifts." Luminous began to feel drowsy, the strain of the battle and the sudden announcement taking its toll. Acheron noticed and gently supported her. "You should go to sleep," she said softly. Luminous nodded, her eyes fluttering close. "Thank you, Acheron," she murmured as she drifted into a deep sleep. Acheron looked at the sleeping Milam and Luminous, her expression softening. Carefully, she lifted both of them into her arms, ensuring they were secure. With a determined look, she opened a new gate and stepped through, carrying them back home. Upon their return, Acheron gently laid Luminous and Milam in bed, ensuring they were comfortable. She stood guard, watching over them as they slept, ready to protect them from any threats that might arise. As the night deepened, Acheron allowed herself a moment of reflection. The battle had been intense, but they had emerged victorious. More importantly, she had ensured the safety of those she cared about. She settled into a chair beside their beds, her eyes never leaving them. For now, they were safe, and that was all that mattered. End of a chapter.